The FIR Podcast Network presents FIR B2B, an audio podcast that brings you the latest news and more in business-to-business communications.
Everyone, it's Paul Gillen with FIR B2B, episode number 26, recording today out of Eastern Massachusetts with my co-host, Eric Schwartzman. Hello, Eric.
Hi, everybody.
We have with us today, our guest is Sarah Goodall, the head of social business for EMEA at SAP. She'll give us a very interesting overview of employee advocacy programs and teaching employees how to use social media, particularly in a European environment where, of course, it's quite different than in the U.S. Different countries have different preferred platforms, different behavioral and cultural norms, and someone who's got all of EMEA to contend with has certainly a very different set of issues than someone in a more homogeneous environment like this. But first, let's get on to a few news items we thought would be interesting to discuss. Eric, there's one you came up with that I thought was really interesting regarding journalists and SoundCloud. Why don't you go over a summary of this?
So one of the students at the Neiman Lab had recorded for his final project a news story, a radio news story, and delivered it to his instructor on SoundCloud. And what he did was he used works in the story that he didn't have copyright to, but he did use just a short 25-second snippet, and he did change the meaning of it because he used it in the context of a news story. And SoundCloud sent him a note saying, look, we've removed it because it violates copyright law. And, he tried to come back and say, well, look, it's fair use. I've changed the meaning of it. I've used it in a news story. And they basically came back and said, look, we just don't have the resources to deal with this kind of thing. As far as the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is concerned, if we get a takedown notice from a copyright holder, we must respect it. And I'd like to read you the end of an article that was written by the student that this happened to. His name is Adam Ragusia. And he writes, I get it. I'm sympathetic. I'm a longtime SoundCloud fan and user. But this still really concerns me. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about how the Internet, and social media in particular, is the new public square, where we exercise our free speech rights. And yet this new public square just isn't public. If you post content on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or SoundCloud, you're on private property. The owner can step out the front door and shoo you away at any time. We are increasingly vesting our First Amendment rights in the hands of private companies. This, more than anything, is what scares me about Facebook's new deal with news organizations, where it will host stories from the New York Times and others within Facebook itself, rather than linking to nytimes.com from the Facebook news feed. We're going to face some pretty profound questions about how we exercise our rights in that environment. And so I thought I would put it to you, Paul, because I know you maintain a blog about the end of newspaper, and I know that this is an axe that you've been grinding for many years. Are we pretty much cutting off our nose to spite our face if we rely solely on these social networks to not just get the audience, but also deliver the content and host the content as well?
It's an excellent question. I think that this SoundCloud example is a rather stark example of the risks that we take when we trust our content to a third party to essentially adjudicate. And the SoundCloud, this is a very interesting story you passed along, is the professor sort of came in and went to bat for his student at SoundCloud. And one of the comments he got back was that, well, yes, this item might have met the fair use provisions under U.S. copyright law, but SoundCloud, which is based in Europe, has an international audience. So essentially they were trying to extrapolate and apply copyright laws worldwide. And of course, every country has different rules on copyright. So they're sort of taking a least common denominator approach, doing the safest thing, and excising this 25 seconds or so of music that was included in the content. And you look at, in contrast to that, what NPR does. NPR uses a lot of music in its audio news programming, but of course they host that content, so they don't have to worry. They are the judge and the jury when it comes to fair use. But if you're using a third-party source. And increasingly, we have to do that. Small publishers in particular have to rely upon third parties, these giants like Facebook, to host their content. You're putting the fate of your content in somebody else's hands. And I think, yes, it is a worrisome trend. And this deal between Facebook and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and several other publishers, I think does raise concerns about Facebook owning this information and essentially having the right to use it as it wishes. We're hoping they'll do the right thing.
Right, but it's specifically pertains to relying on private social networks to host your content. You wouldn't be in the same situation if you were hosting it on your own site.
No, absolutely not. But you don't have the benefit of the access to the audience on your own site.
But you can, because you can move the link.
You can, but the fact is, if you post, example, publishing on LinkedIn's new publishing platform. In my experience with that, I get far greater response, far greater readership from content posted on the LinkedIn publishing platform than I do on my own blog, even if I promote that content through links on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and wherever else. It's just there's that captive audience that LinkedIn can direct that audience toward my content. So there are some compelling reasons why publishers would want to use these existing social networks, meaning access to the audience. But the downside is you don't control what they're going to do with your content. We're just trusting them to do the right thing, wouldn't you say?
Have you ever used the LinkedIn publishing platform to run the intro and then let the jump lead over to your own site?
I haven't tried that. Have you?
I have. I've had some pretty good luck with that, but you almost have to write the intro to build the suspense and tease whatever it is you're going to give them to try to get them to click.
That would be a great topic for a future show, is to find someone who has killed it on the LinkedIn publishing platform and get some tricks for how to make that work. Because we are seeing some topics on LinkedIn generating a huge response for people who don't have a big name or a big presence. But I've used it basically just for a few blog entries that I've reposted from elsewhere. But that's a whole powerful platform in itself.
That is a great idea. If there's anyone listening to this who's really taking advantage of LinkedIn to drive traffic to a destination website, let us know. We'd love to talk to you.
And if this has ever happened to anyone, if you have copyrighted content that you've remixed or mashed up on YouTube and had the experience of having that content just suddenly disappear without any notice. And I think that was one of the issues in this story, Eric, was that SoundCloud didn't give this person any notice. They just unilaterally pulled that content down, and then if you contacted them, they would give you an explanation. But does that trouble you at all that these actions are unilateral?
Well, I mean, the truth is that's the way the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is written. It's actually a fairly brilliant provision, because what it says is you can't shut down a social network for moving copyrighted information so long as the social network takes down shared information at the request of a copyright owner if it's not approved. So they didn't think it through, and they didn't think, well, wait a minute, how does that takedown request work? Do they have to notify the person first? Is there some grievance process where you can contest and under fair use? None of that is baked into the DMCA.
It's sort of related to another topic we want to talk about this week, which is the Sprinklr's acquisition of Get Satisfaction. And one of the issues in this, first of all, Sprinklr is emerging, I'd say, as the big winner in social media monitoring. Raised $46 million recently on a $1 billion valuation. They call these unicorns now, these private companies that are valued at over $1 billion, and there are over 100 of them, I understand, out there right now. But the acquisition of Get Satisfaction gives them an entry into the customer feedback, the live customer feedback market, and also some ownership over that process. And I think one of the interesting dimensions of this story is that, with Twitter manipulating its APIs, pulling Meerkat essentially out of the network unilaterally, relying upon social networks to keep their interfaces open is a very risky strategy these days. And one of the things that Sprinklr is doing with this acquisition is buying themselves a customer feedback mechanism that already has an installed base. It has a customer base. It has big name customers like Procter & Gamble, and it buys them some protection really against relying on third-party services. Would you say that's an issue for companies trying to do customer feedback?
I mean, it is an issue, but at the same time, have you ever gone to Get Satisfaction to air grievances?
Well, no, I think Get Satisfaction is embedded in other websites, if I understand.
It is. But have you ever actually used it?
No, I've never used it.
As a consumer? I mean, I've heard about it many times. I know there's a lot of people talk about it. I know they're very vocal, and they're out there, and they've done very well. But I don't know that as a strategy to hedging your bets against, APIs closing down, it makes sense. I think it definitely makes sense for Sprinklr, but ultimately I think Sprinklr is going to need to be acquired by a CRM outfit, or they're going to run up against the same brick wall. And who knows, maybe it'll be SAP, who we're talking to today on the show. Maybe it'll be Salesforce. But at some point, I think these guys become something that one of those big CRM providers is really going to want.
Well, the whole customer satisfaction area is really interesting, and it involves elements of psychology and wisdom of crowds and mass psychosis, if you will. And I did some work on this. My last book, Attack of the Customers, had a whole dimension of this customer feedback, how customer feedback works. And the idea behind Get Satisfaction is capture customer feedback in a place that you own, rather than sending them to Yelp or Google Places or Foursquare or somewhere else to complain about you. Capture the feedback right there, and there are a lot of benefits to that. Being able to identify problems in your supply chain before they show up somewhere else, being able to identify hit products early on, but also, interestingly, feedback that is captured on your own site tends to be more positive than that in public sites, and often remarkably so. So there's some compelling reasons. When you look at sites that use these customer feedback mechanisms and display the results in line with the products, very often the ratings are quite high, even though they may not be so high in an independent site.
Well, I mean, Salesforce at this point doesn't have an engagement dashboard. These guys are up against Hootsuite and up against Sprout Social in the engagement dashboards side of things. That's obviously a hot area if you're using social at a big, multilateral where there's a lot of different departments and issues need to be routed, but all those communications need to be programmed under one brand. But again, I think if these guys don't somehow cross the bridge and link up with a CRM, ultimately I think they're not going to have a valuable offering. And I'm actually surprised that we haven't seen Salesforce go further with their Salesforce Marketing Cloud. They acquired Radian6 a fairly long time ago. Buddy Media.
I don't hear that much about Radian6 anymore. I know it's still out there, but it seems...
Well, it's a phenomenal tool. I mean, I'll tell you, I rely on it for my intel, and I've gotten really, really good at it. But again, when you want to get into the analytics, I mean, you can't do that manually. You need to be able to apply a whole algorithms and filters to try to get meaning out of all that data. And again, if you can't tie it up, if you can't sort of sync up offline and online behavior, you don't really get any intel. Now, in terms of the whole notion of, hey, people say nice things in your site, and well, clearly, I mean, if I have something bad to say, I don't want to say it on your site. I'm intentionally going to go somewhere else. So the idea that, the research shows that people say nicer things on your site may not mean that they're only saying nicer things, just means that they're intentionally saying that there and saying mean things elsewhere. Because what you find today is that if you leave bad criticism on the business's site that you're doing business with, they're going to remember that, and they may hold that against you in the future.
The psychology is not clear to me why it works that way, but I remember in the course of researching the book, I came across one company. They were a flower delivery company. I don't even remember their name, so I'm not going to try to pinpoint them. But they had absolutely horrible reviews on third-party rating sites. I mean, we're talking about 1 and 5 star reviews, and with hundreds of people rating them this way. Very, very negative feedback. But when you went to their site, I don't know if they were using Get Satisfaction or something else, the ratings were all in the 4.5 out of 5 star. And I even remember speaking to someone, I think it was a Bazaar Voice, about why. I think they used the Bazaar Voice platform. Why does this happen? And he said, we see this all the time. It's one of the compelling reasons to host customer reviews is that the reviews become actually an effective marketing mechanism, and people tend to leave only positive feedback. I don't know why, but your theory may be the reason.
Well, we should get on to our interview, but before we do, I just want to give a shout out to Krishna Day. Krishna Day is a longtime FIR listener based in England, and she's been doing some fantastic work around experimenting with both Periscope and Meerkat. And I think we should put a couple of the links, some of the YouTube movies that she's made, some of these tutorials and demos in the show notes, because if you're looking to sort of mess around with these different channels and integrate them in an experiment, she's done some phenomenal work.
Oh, I can't wait to see what marketing uses come out of live streaming.
Me too.
Well, our guest this week is Sarah Goodall, who is head of social business for EMEA at SAP, the big software company. And I met Sarah through a Social Media Today webinar that we did about employee advocacy. And of course, SAP I've been around SAP for a long time. It's a company that went from being very, very closed in the 90s and the early 2000s to being really one of the most progressive users of social media of any company, B2B or B2C, that I'm aware of. So Sarah has been at SAP since 2008, Hitachi Data Systems before that, Glasshouse before that, so around the tech industry quite a while. Sarah, welcome to FIR B2B.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
We've talked a lot about advocacy on this program. We had Sharon Cross from HDS on a previous program. We also had Chris Boudreau, who's written a book on this. And so the topic is of particular interest. It seems to me that employee advocacy in the U.S. must be relatively simple compared to launching a program like that in Europe, with all the different rules, regulations, the languages, the cultures. I mean, how do you get something like that off the ground?
Yeah, it is quite different, actually, partly because you've got a language barrier as well. You've also got adoption of social tools in different countries. They do different ways of doing business. For example, in Western Europe, Facebook is considered very much a personal tool. So you wouldn't really have employees sharing business content on there. But if you go to more emerging markets like Africa or the Middle East or Russia, those guys live on Facebook. You know, it's an SME-driven market. That's how they do business. So it's a different tool, but a different kind of audience. So understanding the language issues, also understanding the cultural issues, how they use social media differently, are some of the key barriers, I guess, for adoption of employee advocacy. So they would just be some of the topics, I would say.
So I'd be curious to know, how do you convince, say, a Western European employee, obviously, you know, the cultural importance of privacy is something that's near and dear to the heart of most Western Europeans. How do you convince a Western European salesperson to go ahead and use their personal profile for social selling or for business?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And what we've done with our program is we've centered it very much around building a personal brand and the importance of doing that. So we've never talked about it in the context of, you know, this is SAP, we want you to become sort of brand advocates for us. That's not been the direction of the program. It's all about enabling the employee, giving them the tools to build a personal brand. And what we've done is we've actually sold the benefits of that to employees. You know, why in this sort of digital working age, it's important to have a personal brand online. It's important to engage with customers online. So that's how we've positioned it. And certainly for the skeptics who sort of think, oh no, that's my private network, it's just for me. Certainly in the sales industry, they really start to understand, do you know what? This can't be a closed door, my personal network anymore. If I want to make my quota, I have to start thinking a bit more strategically about my personal brand, my presence, my network, and start investing in time in that. So that's been the sort of the approach that we've taken to employees, is really enabling them, but in the context of their personal brand and why they need to build digital brands these days. So
does that mean they stop sharing baby pictures, or they stop celebrating musical artists that they might like, or any sort of divisive choice that they might make that would alienate someone who doesn't have those same personal preferences?
No, not really, because what we try and encourage people to do is we do encourage people to think, sensibly about having a social brand online. So we do say, look, be careful about what you share and the views. I mean, at the end of the day, you still work for a company, so you still have the contract with the company. But at the end of the day, this is your own views, and what you don't want to look like is a robot. And it's important to inject some personality into your everyday, social interactions. So yeah, sure, it's okay to share, your favorite music and stuff, because it just shows that there's a human behind the Twitter account, and it's not just a robotic blasting thing out over Twitter in automatic setting. So no, we encourage personality on social. That's what makes it different.
What differences have you seen, cultural differences have you seen in the different regions in which you operate on the uptake for this program, or on people's willingness to participate in social channels? Has it been pretty unanimously accepted across the region, or are there certain pockets where people are more reserved?
Oh, that's a good question. I would certainly pick out the Netherlands and Italy as quite fast adopters. Certainly the Dutch. They're one of the biggest audiences per capita on LinkedIn anyway. So it's when I talk to LinkedIn, I know that that's one of their massive not growth markets, but it's a very highly adopted market of LinkedIn.
In fact, I believe I've seen statistics that Scandinavians are the most connected, have the largest population representation on Facebook as a percentage of population.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, because I mean, I've lived in Norway for 5 years, so I've been immersed into the Scandinavian culture. They're a very private people, so I am generalizing here, but they definitely, I was going to actually say, out of all of the European markets, the Scandinavians are the most sort of reserved about this, because they like to keep their personal networks personal, and they don't really like to sort of move between the two, a personal business divide. They need a lot of convincing. So actually, out of all the markets, they might be the most connected, but they're probably the least, in terms of open to using social networks for business. But I would certainly earmark out sort of the Netherlands, certainly Italy, and to some extent the UK as well. They're very keen, but probably Netherlands and Italy would be my key sort of markets that I would pick out. Africa as well. Africa and Middle East, high growth markets, hugely social, mainly on mobile technology, certainly in Africa. Those guys are very big social adopters, just by the nature of the market maturity that they're in at the moment. So
from your standpoint, in terms of implementing social business across a broad swath of representatives in different countries, any generalizations you can make about how your approach from an implementation standpoint, in terms of getting people in your company up to speed on social selling, has changed from Europe to the Middle East to Asia?
I can't comment on Asia, because I don't really get involved in Asia, but certainly, so Europe and Middle East. Yeah, I would say I would more divide it between emerging markets and mature markets. So I would say that the emerging markets, they have to be nimble. They are high social adopters anyway, so just as a consumer rather than in business. So those markets just understand social, they get it, they use it in their day-to-day consumer life. So adoption there is a lot higher, and it's been I would say it's a lot faster. They get it. They have to do it. There's no choice. Western Europe, social networks have traditionally been for personal communication. So it has been a little bit slower. You have to convince people. You've also got a generation of, I have to be careful how I say this, but if you've got a generation of sales guys that have come from an old old-fashioned way of doing it. Certainly in our industry, I started out sort of 20 years ago, so I remember the whole RFP process and how you get the vendors in to pitch. Whereas these days, it's all done very much on cloud. It's cloud solutions, very fast purchase cycles. People want to try and buy. It's a digital way of selling, and that I think in the Western markets they're having to shift the culture a little bit. So it's a little bit more. It's a little slower in terms of the social business model than maybe in the emerging markets, is what I would recognise.
You use the term social selling as the sort of the umbrella for the program. Is the program aimed primarily at salespeople, or is it a more general constituency? I mean, can you describe what the program looks like, the training looks like?
Yeah, so we put a program together. The target audience is every employee, in my view. Every employee in this digital age is a potential salesperson for the company. So, for me, I don't like to just pigeonhole the sales guys. However, within the social business model, salespeople are a component of that, and they require a different kind of training to, say, maybe somebody who works in pre-sales, to say maybe somebody who works in HR or marketing. So that's how we constructed it. We recognise that different audiences needed different levels of education. The sales guys are much more about how to build your networks, how to connect on a regular basis, how to stay more front of mind. Whereas a pre-sales guy, they're technical experts. They have a lot of knowledge. So in my view, those guys are, they should be out there being influencers. They should be sharing some of that expertise and knowledge. So they require a different kind of level of social business. So that's one way of dividing the program. But then, of course, you've got employees that are at different levels of maturity. So you've got some that don't get it. Why should I have a personal brand online? And then you've got some that really do get it. They're influencers already. So we have some of those already, to name a few: Sven Deniken, Timo Elliott. We have a few there, Jonathan Becker, recognized influencers in the market. So you've got to kind of overlay it, and it becomes quite complicated when you start overlaying the different levels of social maturity in the employee base and the different functions and the requirements of the different training. So it becomes quite complex, but once you map it out, it's pretty good. So
how do you get it done? I mean, can you talk logistically about how you actually implement a training program that serves the needs of people with different levels of social business maturity? Do you actually get everyone in a room, make them all sit through the same pitch? Do you segment? Do you test them? Is there a way to implement a program that meets the needs of each user based on their maturity? And if so, is ed tech in there? Do you leverage ed tech to get it done?
So what we did is we basically took an influencer and then we deconstructed what it meant to be an influencer online, and we basically mapped a path out, a logical path, and this was quite difficult to do, but we have tried to map out the individual stages of do this, then do that, then do that. So basically we said to employees, if you follow this step-by-step process, you will absolutely get to the end goal. Okay, so what we didn't want to do is just have a smattering of training. Anyone can do, Twitter 101. This is how you use lists. This is how we wanted to make it a logical process, so people could very quickly see, okay, I see where I am on the maturity map, and that's where I need to start my training. And then throughout, we have quizzes, homework, tests. The whole learning model was actually based on, we wanted it to be a social model. So we actually used SAP Jam internally to create a community, so everybody learned at the same time. So it was all very web-based, no classroom-based training. It was 30-minute webinars. It was Q&A sessions. It was a community-based that we've got now with 1,200 employees, where they're all sharing insights, asking questions within the community, and it's answering itself. So we wanted to create a social learning model, because whilst they're learning in that model, they're actually learning how to do social collaboration on a wider scale. So we were very keen to have a collaborative learning model internally, and that's what we've done. And obviously there's a bunch of other resources we used as well in support of those webinars. So blog posts, lots of tools, lots of videos, techniques, and we wrapped a bunch of assets around each webinar module. But we took people on a logical step-by-step path through a training program to help them get to the end goal. So
Can you talk a little bit about channels? I think for U.S. marketers, Europe your region is kind of confusing to them because there are certain platforms that are popular in certain particular countries there that are not well known in the U.S. Are there certain platforms that U.S. marketers should be aware of, North American marketers should be aware of if they're trying to reach people in Germany, Italy, and such that are not familiar here?
Yeah, so certainly in France, Vimeo is a video tool that's more popular to some extent than YouTube. So Vimeo, I think, may not be or recognised globally. Certainly in Turkey, I believe, we've got issues with Twitter and to some extent YouTube, but certainly Twitter, that's not a used platform since all the uprising a couple of years ago. It's quite difficult to use that now. If you're looking at business audiences and you're looking at German-speaking markets, then Xing, Xing, is the equivalent of LinkedIn, and that by far dominates the German-speaking market. So I'm watching that in anticipation, actually, because I see more of my German colleagues moving to LinkedIn. So I don't know what's happening here, but Xing is by far the preferred platform for business to business in the German-speaking markets, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, more so than LinkedIn. So they would be the ones that I would call out. And then if you step into Russia, you're getting into all sorts of kinds of channels. So that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's worth exploring. But they would be the ones that I would call out. So
there are a host of rules and regulations in the United States, many of which were implemented before Facebook existed, that now govern how you can and can't use social media lawfully for business. And this market is just starting to come up to speed on implementing some sort of protections so that employees can comply with U.S. rules and regs. Now, you're obviously responsible for marketing to a much broader constituency from different countries, all of which have different laws. How do you balance risk on the compliance tightrope?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, certainly in Germany, and I don't know the specific laws around this because we treat German-speaking markets as a slightly different region, but there are quite sort of stringent rules around, what employees can do online and what they can't, certainly when it comes to blogs and things. So employees are very sort of resistant and they're a little bit sort of hesitant about what they do. So if we're talking about compliance from that perspective, certainly the German market is a little bit restricted. Generally speaking, the general rule that we have for employees is, we have guidelines. So this is how you behave on social. It's just social etiquette. This is how you should operate. But then we also do have policies. So we have very clear policy. And the details of that policy is pretty much what you see in most policies. But the way I say is when you signed a contract with SAP, it's pretty much the same sort of thing. You would never share confidential information online. You would never share internal information online. So, just think sensibly. You just wouldn't do that stuff if it weren't, for public consumption. So that's the guidelines we give employees. On the flip side, when you're looking about compliance in terms of, what articles to share and things, this is where a tool like Dynamic Signal could really help. And there are other tools on the marketplace as well. And I know one tool on the marketplace is specifically good for this because I met somebody who worked for I think it was a pharmaceutical organization who are heavily regulated and financial institutions. So they need a very clear path of content approval before it gets released to employees to share. So you can set those sort of contingency things within the content sharing platform. So employees will only get content that they know is okay to share with their audiences. So on that side, on that flip side, that's how compliance can be regulated, if you like, from an employee advocacy point of view.
Well, Sarah, obviously a very complex environment that you face over there, but you seem to have a good handle on it, and SAP continues to be an innovator that many B2B companies look to for inspiration. So thank you so much for sharing some of your tactics and tools today with us.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Great talking to you.
You too, Eric. Cheers.
Some things to think about. If you're an international company and you want to roll out a social media training advocacy program worldwide, very different environment in some of these regions. So thank you to Sarah. Eric, what's new? What's coming up for you?
Well, we've launched a new seminar with the Public Relations Society of America called the Social Media Managers Workshop. It's a 2-day workshop. We're launching it in Las Vegas. It'll be April 29th and 30th. In Las Vegas. If you want the details, you can go to bit.ly/Social Media Managers Workshop. And the course is designed to help you learn to sell the value of social media to pretty much anyone, whether they're digitally literate or not. We cover improving search visibility, performing applied social media tasks without relying on technical people, use of free and premium social monitoring dashboards. We're going to cover social media crisis prevention. We're going to look at WordPress, iTunes, SoundCloud, Instagram, Vine, Ustream, and more. Oh, actually, we're doing Meerkat and Periscope as well. So if you're interested, again, it's bit.ly/Social Media Managers Workshop.
Wow, you are on the bleeding edge with Periscope and Meerkat, which I haven't even used yet because I'm on Android. Will be speaking at the AIIM Executive Leadership Council meeting in Washington, June 2nd, talking about collaborative workspaces and the use of social tools behind the firewall. And who knows, maybe Slack is the killer app that's finally going to make that happen, another unicorn company. And continuing with my social media training with Profitecture, training B2B companies. So with that, we will see you in a couple of weeks. This is Paul Gillen saying so long.
See you guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to FIR B2B, a bi-weekly podcast about B2B marketing. FIR B2B is brought to you in association with Lawrence Reagan Communications, serving communicators worldwide for more than 35 years. You'll find more information at www.reagan.com. That's RAGAN. FIR B2B is part of the FIR Podcast Network, a series of business podcasts founded by Neville Hobson and Shel Holtz. The anchor podcast in the network is the Hobson and Holtz Report, a weekly show presented since January 2005. For information about FIR, to see show notes for the podcasts, and to subscribe, visit www.forimmediaterelease.biz. You can also subscribe via iTunes and other podcast directories. We welcome your comments about FIR B2B. Join the conversation in the FIR community on Google+. Look for the FIR podcast community, or email us at fircomments@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.